President Donald Trump's administration continues to take an axe to federal agencies.
Among the agencies the administration is targeting as of late include the Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the IRS.
And in a good sign for the Trump team, it's looking like federal judge Tanya Chutkan might rule in their favor.
Around 1,200 NIH employees have been fired, per the New York Times. 2 CDC programs were significantly cut. One tries to develop PhD lab scientists, while the other helps public health grads and get gigs in local health departments. 700 have been fired at the FDA as well. And as the Times notes, the kinds of health agency workers who were fired include grant proposal administrators, analysts, and scientists. Dr. David Fleming, chairman of an advisory committee to the CDC director, told the Times, quote, "It seems like a very destructive strategy to fire the new talent at an agency and the talent that's being promoted. A lot of energy and time has been spent in recruiting those folks, and that's now tossed out the window."
In response, an HHS spokesperson said HHS is following the administration's guidance and taking action to support the president's broader efforts to restructure and streamline the federal government. This is to ensure that HHS better serves the American people at the highest and most efficient standard.
Cuts at the FAA also has Democrats voicing their concerns. Several hundred have already been fired only weeks after a deadly plane crash over the Potomac in D.C.
There was also a Delta plane crash in Toronto yesterday. We have some of that to put up on screen now. The plane flipped over as it was landing, and there's video footage of that is available and caught fire. Luckily, no one was killed in the accident. There are, of course, injuries. Now, Judge Chutkan might rule that all of these cuts are in fact legal. She wrote on Monday, "The court can't act based on the media reports. We can't do that. The things that I'm hearing are concerning indeed and troubling indeed, but I have to have a record, and I have to make a finding on the facts before I issue something."
Substacker and podcaster Wajahat Ali wrote on X, "Another airline crash. So many casualties and crashes over the past month. It's almost as if we should have had an FAA chief, head of TSA, and not put a freeze on qualified air traffic controllers. But hey, President Musk wants more of the pie, so Trump will give it to him. Good luck, Americans." Using a more sarcastic tone, if you can believe it, historian Kevin Cruz wrote on Blue Sky, "The FAA firings will continue until they stop all these planes from crashing."
But here was analyst Scott Jennings on CNN last night.
There are 45,000 employees at the FAA. We're talking about fewer than 400 people, and he says 0 air traffic controllers and critical safety personnel were let go. So if that's true, I don't really have a problem with it, to be honest with you. I do like the idea of keeping the people who are in the direct chain of command of safety and the air traffic control system and so on and so forth. But I have a hard time believing that there is a single government agency that doesn't have a bloat of administrative personnel that we could probably do without.
Radio host Andrew Wilco wrote on X, "Government workers are protesting because their jobs may be cut if they aren't doing anything useful, but by being out of the office to protest, they're proving they aren't doing anything useful and that their jobs should in fact be cut." Look, I'm always open to arguments that whatever is being cut is the wrong thing, but then I want to hear, well, what are you going to cut instead? Because we spend way too much money and our government is very bloated, and the services that agencies like Health and Human Services and Education render are not very cost-effective anyway, despite all the money we spend on them and all the federal employees we have to manage them. On the FAA thing in particular, I will say, look, okay, I'm open to being persuaded that we should not make cuts here and whatever, we need more FAA people, not fewer. But there's no evidence the recent crashes are due to problems with the FAA or a lack of employees there. For instance, I mean, the most recent crash took place in Canada, so that's not our FAA, obviously, and we don't know that the one in D.C. had to do with that. It sounds to me like there were already known problems about flying helicopters so close to planes over the Potomac, and that maybe we shouldn't be doing that, but that it was not specifically because there was not enough FAA oversight over it. Open to being wrong, but I think it's I think it's putting the cart before the horse, as some liberal commentators are doing, to say that it's the FAA is the reason we've had 3 plane crashes in a few weeks.
Look, Robby, I think we have to be very, very careful about making any sort of sweeping statements about what happened at National Airport just a few weeks ago and that tragedy. And also, it's to be fair, too soon to tell what's going on in Toronto. Our FAA does have a connection, though, of course, to the international airspace and is, in fact, supporting some of the investigation that's happening on the ground in Canada now with the NTSB and the Canadian version of the NTSB. Yeah. Set that all aside. Here's the thing about the FAA and these firings. They are much like every other agency that we've witnessed over the last few weeks here. It's happening like a sledgehammer. It's not as if they are being very particularly careful about who they're pulling out. I mean, just to give you a sense of who they are letting go of in this particular moment, some of them are, in fact, very closely tied to safety, right? You're talking about mechanical inspections type people, safety specialists, people who are program analysts to make sure that those taxpayer dollars that we want put to good use are being done so. So I think Scott Jennings' comment there about, hey, the actually 48,000 employees at the FAA, none of the safety-related ones are being impacted here. The broad mission of the Federal Aviation Administration is first and foremost always safety. And so when you talk about recruitment and you talk about the development of people there, it's all geared towards that as part of the culture. And it's part of the reason why anytime you see something like this happening, it's very, very troubling. Zoom out even bigger and look at things like the cuts at the CDC, scientists. Those types of people are the people who, by the way, help keep us safe during a pandemic. And we've got an avian flu right now doing we don't know what. So I think all of this is very troubling. And it's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at the federal government, looking for efficiencies, looking for reforms. I just don't think we should just be hacking willy-nilly at members of the civil service without knowing what those impacts are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you say that, but I have concerns that very reckless NIH funding is what caused the pandemic in the first place, the total lack of oversight and accountability for the myriad grants granted by not just NIAID, but also now I learn USAID was also making grants to the same organization, EcoHealth Alliance, that purported to do unsafe research on bats in Wuhan, China, not even under the auspices of NIAID and the health officials. It was now being done through this additional agency. That's why I say there's just way too much spending on projects that are not well known to the actual leader of the federal government. They're not well understood by the American people, and significant cuts have to take place. Are they happening exactly the right way that I would want them to happen? I guess not, but if you're at least someone of my ideological predilection, it would feel weird for me to second guess or naysay what is the first serious effort to actually rein in reckless government spending in my lifetime. Now, it should be done by Congress, because if Congress has appropriated money to spend and the executive decides just not to spend it, that actually can't happen. It's supposed to go back to Congress, and then they can do rescission to make sure it's not spent. They should absolutely do that, and it should be structural rather than at random. And then you got to, rehire people like they're trying to rehire people in the terms of nuclear safety, I believe, that they laid off inadvertently. Yeah, that's not good. I hear that. But on the whole, the presumption should be, why do you deserve your government job paid for by taxpayers? Why are you entitled to that job? What are you doing that is in the public benefit? Not a presumption the other way. They're like, oh, all these people are so important, so necessary. Can't part with even a single government employee. Because that's how then you end up cutting nothing. Then you end up growing government, as every other Republican administration has done in the course of my lifetime, despite pledging to reduce the size of government.
So, Robby, I think if you care about accountability and you care about checks and balances, then you don't go in and do things like fire inspector generals. I also think if you care about the future of health programming and policy in this country, you don't gut the very talent pipeline that's going to make sure to keep Americans safe over the long run. Again, I think that wanting to reform government, wanting to make more efficient processes, making sure that taxpayer dollars are spent appropriately is a great idea. But of course, the irony of all these willy-nilly firings and dropping in people who've never worked in government to try and interpret what they think is mission critical, which is related to public safety, having these kinds of people making decisions is actually causing greater inefficiencies, as you point out, the National Nuclear Security Administration, them firing really critical people and now hopefully trying to get them back in quick order.
Coming up on Rising, MAGA World is blasting Tom Hanks. Find out why. We'll discuss.